All right. Hello, everyone. We'll wait just a few minutes as folks come trickling in. Thank you so much for coming to our webinar today on how an affordable housing program supports college students. We'll get started in just a few minutes, but welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, as folks keep trickling in, just want to say thank you so much for tuning in today. We have our first webinar on Zoom. So if you've been to a few of our Schoolhouse Connection webinars before, you might be like, why are we on Zoom? Before we used to use GoToWebinar, but we made this transition. So thank you for your patience as if we work through maybe some technical difficulties here, but we are so excited to have our first webinar. So before we get started, just wanted to let you all know that this webinar is being recorded and it will be archived. So in a week or so, you will receive a copy of this recording as well as a PowerPoint. And so everyone here, the audio is muted, so please ask your questions in the Q&A portion and we will have time at the end of the presentation to get to your Q&A. And here is a copy of the PowerPoint. So if you would like to follow through on your own, I am putting that in the chat for you all to have that available to download. So for folks, if you aren't familiar with Schoolhouse Connection, we are a national organization based in Washington, D.C., with a mission to overcome homelessness through education. And we work from birth all the way to post-secondary education. We provide strategic advocacy on the federal and state level and practical assistance, so doing a lot of webinars and trainings such as this. We have a youth leadership and scholarship program, which will be available starting next month. And you can learn more about us by joining our newsletter, which I will add that in the chat as well, or joining our Facebook group where we share information, best practices, and just kind of learn from one another. My name is Jillian Sitjar, and I'm the Senior Higher Ed Program Manager here at Schoolhouse. I help to successfully transition students to and through higher education. And my background is in higher ed and student affairs, working on college campuses and housing and multiculturalism. And so I know this is a really busy time for many colleges with the end of the year and graduation. So just thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And before we hear from our panelists, I really just kind of want to provide some ground setting on the importance of higher education and the impact COVID has had. So over these last few years, more and more jobs are requiring some sort of post-secondary education. And we believe that post-secondary education is necessary for our young adults to have a well-paying job that they can afford to have stability and housing. Higher education is also linked to better health and well-being. And unfortunately, the pandemic has really disrupted many students' ability to pursue this higher education, especially our students experiencing homelessness. And so really now more than ever, it's important to have really distinct and targeted outreach to support and identify this population. And we're seeing, more and more students right now that are graduating from high school, they're deciding not to pursue college and they go straight into, working a job right after graduation because maybe they don't think college is worth it right now because of the cost, or they have that need that they need to make money and support themselves and their family. And we're seeing that on a larger scale across the country. So last year, we saw a 2.7% drop in enrollment, which means since the pandemic, there's been more than a 5% drop of students, resulting in over 900,000 students missing from college campuses. Community colleges are getting hit the hardest. They saw about a 10% drop in their enrollment. And in addition to our low enrollment numbers, FAFSA numbers have also been down. So they were about 5% down. And as of March, a few months ago, there's been a 12% decrease in FAFSA renewals this year, and it's even greater for our lower income and marginalized students. In the fall of 2020, the Hope Center conducted a survey of about 200,000 students from over 202 colleges and universities. And they found that about 14% of these students were impacted by homelessness, and 48% of them were affected by housing insecurity. And we imagine that these numbers are actually quite higher since so many students didn't re-enroll after that spring of 2020 because of the pandemic. And also, we typically find that a lot of students who fill out these surveys typically have the time to do so, the capacity, and the technology to fill out these surveys. So again, we imagine this number is quite higher, but it's still important to have this baseline of numbers of, that our students experiencing homelessness are still on our college campuses. However, despite all of these barriers, our students are still deciding to pursue a post-secondary education, and we want them to be set up for success. So the California Homeless Youth Project conducted a survey of over 200 youth with lived experience of homelessness and asked them what they need to be successful in school. And they said these following things. So number one, a connection to a positive, supportive adult, which you on this call here might be that person for someone. Number two is stability. So being able to access those basic needs like food, housing. Number three is help navigating financial aid. And then lastly is knowledge of existing campus support programs and resources. And so I'm just really excited to have my Oregon panel here to talk through what providing that stability can look like and by providing that housing with the ARCS program. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my panelists to introduce themselves and share a little bit about what they're doing. Pam, I think you're...
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. So Ryan and I are going to start. I'm Pam Blumenthal. I'm the director of the ARCS program at College Housing Northwest. And Jillian, did you want each of us to introduce ourselves or just introduce ourselves as we go?
Maybe as we go would be great.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Great. So Ryan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and then I'll get started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Sturley. I'm the development manager at College Housing Northwest.
Great. So we're excited to be here, and not knowing everybody that's on the call, I want to really start with defining what student housing insecurity is. And for the information Jillian provided, the issue is growing, and it is connected to the increase in rental costs, but also tuition, books, and fees in college going up, just the general cost of going to college. And it's impacting our most marginalized students the most. As in many cities, especially on the West Coast, we're in a housing crisis. Rents in Portland have increased 39% over the past year, which is the highest rental increase in the United States, according to a Redfin report. And the situation is dire for students, especially because many students are not eligible for affordable housing programs like living in LIHTC funded housing or being eligible for Section 8. So full-time students often find themselves in situations where they are couch surfing, living in their cars, living in shelters, and don't know where they're going to sleep from day to day. And as you can imagine, this is impacting their ability to stay in school. This is especially prohibitive for students already at risk for dropping out. And that we know that first generation, low income, LGBTQIA students and other marginalized groups drop out of college at higher rates. The other issue here is housing insecurity is something that not everybody knows about. If you're not in higher ed, if it's not your day-to-day, you've maybe heard people say, oh, well, when I was in college, I struggled. The struggle is different. And part of our work in providing affordable housing is also to advocate and to elevate the issue of housing insecurity and make sure everybody knows that this is an increasing problem. I'm going to turn it over to Ryan to talk about the history of our organization and of ARCS.
Thanks, Pam. So a quick history on College Housing Northwest. We're a 501c3 nonprofit student housing provider. We started in 1969. We were actually started by Portland State University students in response to an urban renewal project going on in the city of Portland that was demolishing a lot of the housing around Portland State University at the time. And we're a developer, owner, manager of student housing. We currently have 500 apartments in Portland, and we're purchasing a project in East Portland that's 79 apartments on June 1st. And College Housing Northwest has 3 core components to our mission. The first is providing affordability in our rents for students, reducing housing barriers for students, and then providing supportive services. And the way we provide affordability is, well, we're a nonprofit, so we don't have investors or people we have to, or we're not required to maximize our return. So we can kind of translate that into lowering rent for students. We don't pay property taxes, which is a big help in being able to reduce rents. And then critically, we limit the amount we raise our rents. So, over the past 4 years, we've raised our rents an average of 2% a year. And so you compare that with what Pam mentioned of, a 39% rent increase in the overall market, and, over time, limiting the amount we increase our rents compared to the overall market allows us to kind of provide a deeper affordability, as time goes on. So ARCS, quick history on ARCS. We started in the spring of 2020. And so that was, after the pandemic, we had kind of a unique situation where we did have some vacancy. We had some students, moving back home or dropping out of school. And so typically we don't have any vacancy in our buildings. And so we kind of took that opportunity to start this pilot program and create, take some of those vacant units and create, make them, deeply affordable, and create this pilot program. At the same time, we started the pilot. We also started working with Mount Hood Community College and Portland Community College and Portland State University, PSU, to form what's now the Coalition to House Students. And that's more of a group focused on advocacy and raising awareness of the issue of housing insecurity at the local, state level. And one of the first things that coalition did was put on a Student Housing Insecurity Summit in November of 2020. We had over 100 folks attend from kind of different sectors, legislators, folks in philanthropy, developers, housing providers, really with the goal of bringing this issue of student housing insecurity to light, and at the state level. And then in fall of 2021, we received State ARPA funding for the ARCS program. And that was kind of our first significant investment into the program that helped us transition it from this pilot into kind of a fully fledged program. And part of the reasoning behind creating this program is, in the spring of 2020, the Hope Center had released a report on Oregon Community College students. They surveyed most of the community college students in the state of Oregon, and the results were pretty alarming to us. Over half of the students said they were housing insecure in the previous year. 20% said they had experienced homelessness in the previous year. So we kind of really took that data, we saw kind of what was going on, anecdotally in our housing, and kind of used that as an impetus to create this program.
Great. And I'm going to talk about how it works, the program. And Ryan mentioned our partners, which also include New Avenues for Youth, who are here. Sean's here on the panel, and NAYA, which is the Native American Youth Association. So through our partnerships, they refer students to our program. And, currently, we have limited spots. We have about 30 students currently enrolled, but it's growing over time. You can see the eligibility criteria here. Students must be at least half-time and be referred by a partner, be in good academic standing. And then we have some general rental criteria, and no outstanding debt over $3,000 that's not education related, no evictions, no history of felonies. There's a few others, but those students occasionally could check that they do have those things, and we do have a process of looking at exceptions. So even though we have to kind of ask these standard questions, we work individually with the students to navigate if there are some problematic things and some reasons behind them, and we really try to work with them. We, as Ryan mentioned, minimal barriers. We have no rental history is okay. It's okay. They don't have income requirements. There's no deposit for ARC students, no application fee, and then some reduced utilities depending on which property they're in. We have some free Wi-Fi available, and we also have eviction prevention services, which includes appeals and support and navigating through, if there are any problematic things that come up. The personalized support is really key. We have connections to our referring organizations. So if students are struggling, we have releases of information to talk to the folks that refer them. They're checking in monthly. We have an emergency grant fund. If a student's unable to pay their portion of the rent 1 month, they can apply for that. And then we also provide access to resources. So the rental subsidy is 50% of what our normal rent is. And for some of our partners, depending on their funding resources, there might be other housing programs that students could get their full rent paid, depending what they're eligible for. And then I've mentioned partnerships a bit, and these are our partners here: Portland State, Mount Hood Community College, Portland Community College. We have a pretty new partnership with Clackamas Community College, Native American Youth Association, and New Avenues for Youth. We are currently seeking new partners, being a relatively new program. I've only been with College Housing Northwest since January. Previous to that, I was working at Portland Community College. So we're growing the program, and we're growing partnerships, looking for culturally specific nonprofits, and also engaging funders. What's unique about this collaboration with this group, as well as other members of our coalition, is that we are gathering to look at collaborative fundraising across organizations. We've also brought our government relations teams together to do policy work and advocacy. Also, press releases and things related to student housing insecurity. We come together and talk about that across institution. And we have new projects that we're working on, and new ways to get out the word about student housing insecurity and to make an impact. And then lastly, this is, I've already touched on some of these things, and Ryan, we talked about advocacy. There's a lot of opportunity in this area, and we're doing our best to be at the table for different conversations. Housing policy and education policy and work projects are siloed often. So bringing together folks working on housing and education together has been helpful. We know that without stable housing, education is nearly impossible. That's something that Schoolhouse Connection is doing too, bringing those two worlds together. We're increasing our capacity as best we can through our fundraising strategy. College Housing Northwest has been a nonprofit for a long time, but has not been a fundraising nonprofit. So this is a new area for us, and we're working on a strategy for that, and kind of looking for some government funding as well as philanthropy through foundations as well as individual donors. We have an upcoming partnership with DHS, which I'll touch on, and then Ryan can talk about for a second. DHS we connected with them around their youth program, homelessness program, and we're looking for a partner to provide transitional housing for youth coming out of homelessness or shelter. And so we have been funded from them to start housing about 25 youth in our current housing. And then also they've given us a large grant for our new property that we're going to purchase. Ryan, you want to talk about how that large investment is going to work?
Yeah, so this is will be a $3 million investment. And I think what's unique about this is it's going to be a capital investment to essentially offset the cost of purchasing the property in East County that I mentioned before, the 79 unit property. So because of a lot of the policy barriers that were mentioned before related to student housing, it is extremely difficult to access affordable housing resources and financing resources to build affordable student housing that would allow for kind of permanently affordable housing to be built. And so this kind of DHS partnership is very unique in that it's kind of filling that gap that exists in that we don't have kind of the same resources for student housing as traditional affordable housing. And so that $3 million will essentially provide permanently affordable apartments in that project for these youth transitioning out of homelessness and shelter.
And I think we're going to turn it over to Tracy.
Hi everyone, I'm Tracy Simmons and I use she and her pronouns. I'm the Associate Vice President of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at Mount Hood Community College. And I just want to share what this partnership can look like for an organization such as ours. So of course, we have to be thinking about just our student body to begin with. And we've lost a ton of enrollment, and we attribute that to the cost of being housed, the cost of attendance, and not just the cost of tuition, right? But the cost of transportation, books, even the tools, right? To be able to participate in school online, because we went mostly online at the beginning of the pandemic, such as so many other organizations. But we have 42% students who identify as students of color. 41% of our students are Pell eligible, so meet the federal guidelines for getting a Pell grant. That also translates to, kind of limited income, limited resources to pay out of their own pocket for college. And about 42% of our students are part-time. So we are, kind of dealing with a population that is oftentimes really hard to be able to stay in school to begin with. We were part of the participants with the Real College for the community colleges in Oregon. And you can see here that 56% of our students, so more than half of our students, had some type of basic needs insecurity. 42% of students had food insecurity, 35% housing insecurity, and 12% of our students were homeless. So you can see that as compared with our peer institutions. But I think it's important to also kind of situate some information about the area that we live in. And so, we're east of Portland, and if you know anything about East Side communities, there's oftentimes a pooling of poverty. And Gresham and the surrounding area is no different than other East Side communities. About 35% of East County residents are cost burdened. According to a 2017 study, it's 22 now. So we can just assume that that number has gone up. And when I say cost burdened, I mean that 50% or more of an individual's income is going to housing costs and cost just to live, right? It's just really interesting too that, you know, in that construct, we have to think about also how many people are homeless every night in the city of Portland. And according to a snapshot done in January of this year, it showed that 6,633 students or people were living unsheltered outside. And so I always think about who are our students, but who are our potential students, right? Those folks who could use an opportunity in the community college setting, who currently are not even able to get started because they don't have their basic needs met. So just trying to kind of give a holistic view of what's happening. So, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, we ramped up our student basic needs focus. The work had been being done for a long time, and I want to give a shout out to all the folks at Mount Hood who had been seeding that work, had been, you know, coalescing, bringing folks together. But as soon as we saw the data from the Real College survey, we were like, this needs attention now. And so we've really been ramping up our student basic needs work and focus on capacity building, but it's all been centered within an equity framework, hence why I'm here. All of this work has been put under the Office of Equity and Inclusion because we know that student basic needs is an equity issue. I want to reference Jillian's slide that showed that there is a 16% Black-white basic needs gap. So if we're not looking at racial equity within this, we're going to miss something. But we focused on resource allocation, so technology support, being able to provide laptops for students, being able to provide hotspots and Wi-Fi service for students, of course, childcare and transportation. Many of our courses that could not be taught online were still being taught on the campus all through the pandemic. And so those students still needed to get there through the transportation. Of course, we've supported utilities and housing. We've paid people's rents. We've given people support for not being evicted and the like. But housing continues to be one of the hardest things to be able to provide for a student. In Portland, to get into a shelter, say 1 or 2 nights stay in a shelter, it can take up to 2 to 3 weeks. And that is prioritizing women identified folks with children. If you are a single male individual, the likelihood that you'll be able to get into a shelter in Portland is very, very low and takes a long, long time. And so we're also thinking about that through the equity lens. But housing continues to be one of the most challenging resources to be able to provide for our students. So, you know, through this strategic partnership, of course, we're being able then to say, hey, how about this ARCS program? You might qualify as we're trying to deliver on all of these other resources. But, you know, the uplift of the needs of students in the region is so important. It's critical that our policymakers, those folks who have a seat at the table and have resources to help us solve for these problems have to know what our students are experiencing on a regular basis. Building capacity for that policy development and having Pam and Ryan and other folks also getting seats at the table to say, hey, this is what's really happening. This is what's happening on the ground. This is what our students are telling us. These are the resources that we need. The ability to share data and best practices. I think Pam said it well. We do a lot of this work in silos. And so sometimes that provides barriers for us to share data about, hey, this is what our students are dealing with. What are your students dealing with? And so that sharing of data and best practices makes us all better at the work that we're trying to do. So thinking about braiding resources. Many of us did get pandemic funds for our organizations, but that's one-time money. That money is not going to be sustainable through 2023, 2025. When we see this 40% spike in the cost of housing in Portland, we don't see that that's going to change. And if we know anything about our sister cities of Seattle and San Francisco, the bubble's not even here yet. So we need to be in front of this like right now. And then also to present that unified front with a demand for regional solutions to say, hey, we don't want to end up in a space where we literally have to, either figure out how to house our students in the gym and we've done that. But we need these regional solutions. And so by saying, hey, we're unified in our goals, we're unified in our support and advocacy for students. These are the things that we need to do. And then, of course, last but definitely not least, is amplifying the experiences of our students, really creating opportunities for policymakers and folks who have the resources and have the wherewithal to make change, to like sit in space with our students and hear what our students are dealing with night after night. All right.
Great. Well, hi, my name is Sean Sewell. I'm the Executive Director at New Avenues for Youth, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about our organization and how we're involved with this project. I think to start, I would say that we are approaching this conversation from a different lens. We provide transition age youth with services focused on housing instability and homelessness. We're about 25 years old as an organization. And we serve people as young as 9 years old and all the way up to age 25. And as you'll see, if we move to the next slide, we actually serve a wide range of youth with intersecting identities. And the common thread is that they all either are at risk of or have some kind of housing instability and homelessness. And that's a pretty wide continuum. So from prevention, experiences with systems or identities that are at risk of falling into housing instability and homelessness, all the way to folks who meet kind of the late stage, kind of chronic homeless definitions, long times living outdoors with disability, and that whole spectrum in between. You can see from this slide just some of the different populations that we serve, and we have culturally specific and responsive services targeted for different populations. We can move to the next slide. There's two slides here that give just an overview of our services. I'm really going to key in on a couple things. One is that we really have a pretty comprehensive array of services. There's a lot of complex barriers and needs that young people have. I want to hone in though on really the two key ones is education, job training, and employment. And what I'll say is that the organization I said is 25 years old. I think it was in year 24 that we established our first, well, the very first year we opened, we established our first education programming. And the following year, we established our first workforce development programming. And from my perspective, I've been with the organization 25 years. Really, the pathway to post-secondary education has been one of the most critical tools that we've had to help people change their circumstances, remove barriers, and move on to better health and well-being. And so it's pretty heavily invested in the kind of programming that we do. And it's part of what led us into partnership with College Housing Northwest and ultimately the ARCS program. We'll skip to the next slide. And you'll see just again, a few other additional services that we have. As I mentioned, intersecting populations, foster care transition, overrepresented among young people who experience homelessness, LGBTQIA2S+, overrepresented among people who ultimately experience homelessness, and sex trafficked and/or survivors of sexual exploitation, also overrepresented among those who experience homelessness. And if we can just go to the next slide. Thank you. Well, so our relationship with College Housing Northwest actually started I should have called this the pre-pilot, started way back in 2015. And actually our relationship started because we were working with a new idea around helping young people who were aging out of foster care, who had housing instability at that point in their lives, with a pathway into post-secondary. And in early conversation with College Housing Northwest, one of the things that really we latched onto was a lot of the very rich resident services that they offered sounded like a lot like the trauma-informed care that we provide through our continuum of service. And as we started talking, it was clear that if we combine those rich resident services with the kinds of supports that our system designed for folks who have housing instability, we could really wrap around students who are trying to succeed through education. There's lots of, you can see that in that early work that we did, below market rent subsidy, you heard Pam talk about that 50% subsidy, and that New Avenues was able to kind of use other subsidies that different, depending on people's identities and experience, they may be eligible for, to combine and make those rents either no cost or as reasonable as possible, and those rich wraparound supports. Housing tied to education engagement, well, I'll keep going, I'll share that in a little bit. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, so ARCs, with the pandemic hitting and all of the things that folks have described above, our community is getting strained in even greater ways. It's why these kinds of critical initiatives have really, we need them in order to continue to meet the increase in demand and need. I mentioned education and employment as a critical tool toward future earnings. One of the things I think is really important to understand about ARCs too, when I talk about that continuum of housing instability and housing need, right now in our community, because of the level of need, a lot of the housing resources are focused on that deep end of impact. So chronically homeless, literal homeless, and we actually need solutions all along that continuum of housing instability. And so one of the things that I think is really important and unique for us as a homeless youth provider is that the ability to pair housing supports and subsidy with readiness, where somebody is around readiness and motivation, and use that momentum to help them be successful, which is a kind of critical component that makes this work. And I mentioned already, really a lot of parallels in the service model to what we see as best practice in working with transition age youth in the variety of other services that I described above. Go to the next slide. So, just since the pandemic, we've served a lot of youth in partnership with College Housing Northwest, but just since the pandemic, we've had 9 youth go through this pilot of ARCs. There's, New Avenues serves over 60% of the young people we serve identify as Black, Indigenous, or youth of color. We have a high number of young people who identify as LGBTQIA2S+. We see pretty good outcomes from this relationship. We've had, of the youth that have exited from this cohort, 100% of them moved into safe and stable housing. They all made success or had success on their either education, employment, or stability goals, which is really great. And I did want to share one quick success story because I think it's just so cool. But as part of that, I would say, along that continuum I described, these are not just the easier to serve young people. We have served through this partnership folks who have had barriers around domestic violence, around citizenship, around mental health, all of those things, but with the right supports and the motivation to engage in post-secondary, we have seen great results. Now, I will share that we had a young person come through in our early pilot that we did together who was living outside in a tent for a long time, came through our services, participated in transitional housing, and transitioned from transitional housing into post-secondary and college housing with College Housing Northwest, graduated with their bachelor's degree, and came back to become an employee of our organization. And here's the really cool part. The really cool part is the pilot, the project that Pam shared a little while ago about expanding, buying a new property and expanding. This person is interested in pursuing the case management support role that would support that project. And I think nothing demonstrates better what's possible than that kind of trajectory. Next slide. So just quick lessons learned. Low barrier, you heard College Housing Northwest talk about, those criteria. I can tell you lots of our students had those exceptions to those criteria that we were able to kind of do relationship work and talk through and not have it be a barrier to housing. Relationship matters. Communication is the key. Really, it doesn't work if it's just a housing partnership. It has to be a full service and relationship partnership. And the last thing I would say about this is centering education first. There's way more need for housing with the homeless crisis that we have than ARCS can ever provide. We can easily fill all those rooms with young people who need housing. And it's really important that we're combined for this kind of program to work, that education is the center, and we're working with students who are motivated around post-secondary or education skills development, and that the housing need is interfering with their ability to achieve those goals. And then last, I think this is the last slide. Yep, there you go.
It's all you, Eric.
Thank you. Thank you to all the presenters too. That was great. So yeah, my name is Eric Tompkins. I'm 33 years old. I'm an African-American male. I'm a student at Portland State University, and I major in communication studies. I've been attending Portland State for the last 2 years, and I plan on finishing my degree by the end of this year. So I'm really close. I would be considered like a first generation college student. Neither of my parents attended college. My brothers and my sisters, they don't have a college degree. So I'll be the first one to earn a degree after I get done. After I finished my degree, I would like to go back to working with people. Like I would like to be an educator or maybe a counselor or, something along those lines, because I really enjoy helping people. And I also have previous experience working in schools as a tutor, as a coach, as a teacher's assistant. So I would really like to get back into that. So as far as how I met or how I got in the ARCS program, I know it was already previously stated by the other presenters. Portland, it's the increase on living expenses is just exponentially risen, in the past couple of years for sure. Over those last, as long as I've been in college, and even before that, prior to that, I've struggled to find affordable housing. It's hard. It's really hard. So, and I don't really have parents or relatives that can help me out financially while I'm in college. So I rely really just on myself. And the government loans and the grants that I've gotten, I'm appreciative for, but it's not enough to pay for everything. It's just not. It'll cover some, but it won't cover all. So I've had to work at least part-time during that, yeah, it's been difficult, and it's also affected me at times. It's affected my grades. It's affected my work. It's affected my personal life, my relationships with others, because I've had to do so much, and I've been pulled so many different ways. It's been hard. But I found out about the ARCS program in February of this year, and I was able to connect with Hillary Knapp and Pam Blumenthal through the Portland State Care program, and that they're a program that helps students that are experiencing homelessness. And I told the care advisor, about my situation. I gave her my information, and then I was referred to ARCS. After I met with Hillary Knapp, I filled out a form and I provided some of my personal information. And then in March of this year, I was able to get housing. It's a real blessing. I really appreciate the simplicity, because at that time, I was experiencing homelessness. I had just got out of a really bad situation of where I was living. And, it was making it really difficult. I saw the negative effects of my grades. I was missing more work. Also, I was just not as healthy, physically and mentally as I was, because I was experiencing all that. And without the arts program, I'll be honest, like I would have had to take less classes. I would have had to cut back in school, or I would have had to stop going to school altogether. And that would have been a real shame because of how close I am, So, since I've moved in secured housing through the ARCS program, I've been able to concentrate on school more. My grades have gotten better. I've been able to enjoy school more. And I've also been able to take care of myself physically, like I've gotten back to that. And I'm in a better space, mentally, and my emotions, like emotionally, I've been better too. So it's helped me all around. So I'm really appreciative of what the ARCS program did for me. And, just listening to the presenters too, like this program it's a great program. It's vital. This is vital for people that are students, and that especially students who are from low income housing, or low income, people that are, don't have college degrees, people that don't have parents or guardians or relatives that can help them. This is essential, so I know that was short, but I appreciate you guys' time, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Eric, for sharing, and just congratulations on being so close to graduation. We are all rooting for you. Pam, did you have anything before I jump into the wrapping up with resources and Q&A?
No, we're hoping people have some questions. We'd love to chat.
Yeah, so please send in your questions in the Q&A portion. As those are coming in, I just want to highlight a few resources. So we have a ton of resources on our higher education page, including our tips for helping homeless youth succeed. And so these are living documents where we highlight best practices that we're seeing across the country, and we update them every few months. So if you are doing something unique at your institution to support students experiencing homelessness, let me know. We'll highlight your work there. We also have a ton of higher ed archive webinars that you can tune into, and then our FAFSA page. So within the last 2 years, we created a dedicated financial aid page because we just were having so many questions about the FAFSA, because for homeless youth, it is a little bit different process. And there are new provisions that are going to be taking place for homeless and foster youth, which we are super excited about. We are going to be doing more targeted webinars to kind of debrief and discuss what these provisions are and what implementation strategies look like. So definitely recommend you check that out. And as we are still waiting for some more questions to come in, right after this, so at 11:30 Pacific time, I'm on East Coast, so I'm like, oh, I don't know what the time is. In the next 45-ish minutes, we are going to be hosting a congressional briefing with our youth. This will be completely youth-led. We're going to be discussing 4 federal higher ed and homelessness bills and what the impact would be if these bills pass. And so I'm going to put the link here on the chat as well, if folks are available. And if you can't tune in for the full time, please register and you'll get a copy of the recording. And so I'm going to leave our contact information up here. You will get a copy of this PowerPoint as well as the recording in the next few days. But I see that we have a question here. We have a few questions. So for College Housing Northwest, do you partner with any colleges across the river from you? They are in Vancouver, Washington, and was wondering if students attending Clark College or WSU Vancouver qualify your program, or is it Oregon specific?
Right now, we're just in the Portland metro area. And again, we're hoping to grow our partnerships. I don't know about across the river. Ryan, do you have any thoughts on that in the future? I think we've had some conversations, but there are some challenges, I think.
Yeah, I think we're open to kind of expanding our partnerships, but yeah, we just need to maybe if you could reach out to Pam or myself through email, we can kind of talk a little bit more about it.
And then I see the second one about how many students. Right now, we only have 30 spots. And again, that's just due to our funding. We are fundraising the cost, which I didn't really talk about, which includes the rental subsidy and support, is about $9,000 a year per student. And so we are, actively raising funds to support more students, but that is currently we're at our max and we have a wait list at 30.
And then I did have a question. If a student is, in high school and they're graduating and attending one of the schools, are they eligible to be part of the ARCS program yet, or do they need to wait like a semester and be enrolled for half that time, or what does that look like?
No, they can be eligible. Again, they have to come through the referring folks just because we have so many limited spots. So they would be eligible. We've had situations that students are going to actually lose housing with their families as soon as they graduate. If they are actively engaged and ready to start in the fall, then we could consider them as we have availability. Yeah.
Great. That's awesome to hear. We know so many students with colleges, they're like, as soon as someone turns 18 or once they graduate, families might ask their students to leave. So that's amazing that you have that option. We have a few more questions. Have we had any ARC students interested in resident councils with CHNW?
I don't know the answer to that. This must be a CHNW staff person or student. I think, Eric, do you know about the resident councils there? Have you heard about that yet?
No, I don't, and I shouldn't give an answer because I'm not sure.
We'll check with Hillary, who's the staff person working with students, and students are eligible to be part of those councils, but I don't know if we've had any yet beyond there. So I see some things coming in the chat too, some questions in the chat.
So we have, how does one get started with a similar program if there's no program to address college homelessness in another state?
That's a great question. I'd be happy to talk to you if you want to reach out to me. I have some suggestions. The short answer is you need to find your partners. You need to find your people. These people here on our panel are are great resources, and they come to the table with all kinds of collaborative ideas. So that's a way to start. Find people that are really engaged and interested, and start talking and meeting regularly. But I'd be happy to talk to you some more about that.
All right, and we have another question. Someone would like to implement a college plan mentoring program for homeless youth during their high school years. So they work for an ESC. And so question for Eric or any of the other panelists, would it have been helpful to get information on the FAFSA, connection to post-secondary resources prior to graduating from high school? What value would you find in any sort of these types of resources?
That question's for me, right? Okay. So, yes, I'll say this, like my experience in the past working in community centers, working with high school students in schools, yeah, they need information like this before they graduate. This should be like things that go into housing, things that have to do with food, things that have to do with the very basic necessities of life should be a part of the going to college, like in finding referrals, like referring those students to places where they can get housing and get food and get extra money or get it, whatever type of resources they need. That would certainly have helped. When I was in high school, I'll admit, like I didn't get that. My situation is slightly different because I started college in my late 20s. So it's a little bit different. And I knew a little bit more, but still I needed this, so yes, for sure. College, high school students going into college, transitioning into that part of their life, they need things like this. There should definitely be a part of it. So if you want to ask me another part of that question, if I left out anything, I'm open to answering. So.
Yeah, and I would just say, on top of that, we know in the high schools, there's liaisons and there's people there that have this knowledge on supporting students experiencing homelessness. And we want to do anything to kind of bridge that gap between from high school to college. So something that we are advocating and we're going to talk about in the virtual briefing is having a homeless higher education liaison on college campuses. So something that mimics the K through 12 liaison in high school. We have that on the college campuses, and it can help with that warm handoff between the high school to college. And so a student will have someone in their corner, someone to reach out to once they graduate from high school. They might not necessarily feel so alone. Follow-up question, Eric. What grade would you suggest this information to start? 10th grade, 11th grade? And folks have any other thoughts?
Okay, I'll start. I'll make it short. Nowadays, we have way more access to information than we ever did. I would say start right when they're in high school. Get this going through their head. I mean, maybe, yeah, like after, let the freshmen, get initiated into everything. But 10th grade, 11th grade, when they're starting to think about going into college, that's when these conversations need to be had. That's when the counselors, the teachers need to be like, what's your housing situation like? And you could find out, what their parents, how much their parents kind of make, what their, income levels are. So we can be making these suggestions. It should start early. It really should start early because we start, let's be honest, colleges start recruiting kids for sports and all sorts of other things in 10th grade. So we need to start saying, hey, what do you need? What's going to make you successful, going into, college? So yeah, start early for sure.
I just wanted to add that we did pilot having staff on Portland Community College's campus that were focused on youth aging out of foster care with the idea of creating additional supports. I know the community colleges are doing a great job wrapping around all kinds of student barriers and doing outreach. And so I think it's exciting to hear that there could be federal funding to do this in a much larger way. The challenge we had was it was hard to sustain, and we kept having to try to fundraise for it to keep it going. So that's exciting to hear.
And then just wanted to clarify, yes, we have a bill that we're pushing to have liaisons at the college level that will be similar to the McKinney-Vento Act for colleges. And some states already have this. So California have homeless higher ed liaisons. We worked on legislation in Tennessee and in Maine. So some states do have these mandates for homeless higher ed liaisons or single points of contact, but we hope that this will be across the whole country. And if you want to learn more about this bill and other pieces that we are going to be discussing, please join our virtual briefing. Okay. I want to see if there are any last remarks from our panelists before we close out. And again, if you have any specific questions or want to learn more about building a program similar to this at your college or at your state, all of our contact information is on the slide. Again, you will get a copy of this recording and the PowerPoint in a few days. But with that, I'll pause and see if our panelists have anything else to add before we close out.
We just really appreciate the opportunity College Housing Northwest does to be here, and excited about what's to come and really elevating this issue to create more affordable housing for students.
Thank you. Yes, you are all doing such an amazing job. Please let us know what we can do to support you and the work that you're doing. Again, Eric, congratulations. You're so close. All right. So hopefully we'll see you in next 33 minutes if you want to tune into the virtual briefing. But thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Jillian.